My name is Maisara binti Mahazir and I am the first presenter. I will present about the Victorian era first. So, this era timeline started from 1837 until 1901. It is also known as the Age of Compromise. Victoria has been seen as a good leader, as it was one of the Britain's greatest eras, served as the world's biggest empire. It is also viewed as a flyover or a bridge between Romantics and the modernist poets of 20th century. This poetry came into conflict with modern poetry, stimulated by a number of Victorian features. It shouldn't be taken as completely apart from Romantic poetry. It is a continuation of the Romantic era. The Victorian poetry no doubt witnessed some era-stirring incidents, yet it stuck more or less to certain accepted traditions. It had some beliefs and ideals of life. The themes for Victorian era are realism, humanism, idealism, socialism, criticism, and naturalism. Moving on to the similarities between these two eras. The first one is main domain the literary works in both eras. For example, Robert Browning for Victorian and Ezra Pound for modern. A few examples for Robert Browning poems are The Ring and the Book and Men and Women. An example for Ezra Pound's poems are The Return, The Garden, and The Tree. Next is one of the themes is slightly similar. There is humanism under the Victorian era and human rights under the modern era. The main base is about humans.
So these are the themes of modern era. The first one is war, social justice, dissatisfaction, human rights, futurism, life, arts, and the last one is alienation and violence.
I am Yastiayu Ratu Maklu. I am going to continue the presentation with the modernist era. It started to form in the 1890s during World War I, the Great Depression era, and also World War II. Basically, modernist poetry can be characterized by two main features, which are firstly, its technical innovation in the writing through the extensive use of free verse. Because authors wanted to move from the previous era, they created their own significance. Next, it addresses on the individual rather than society. Author is more interested to write about the individual struggles and the challenges they face in that era. Modernist poetry also focuses on the surface of the poem, preferring on the literal meaning of the words rather than any metaphorical or symbolic meanings attached to them. Modernist poetry no longer considers beauty as the highest achievement, but the ambiguity of ideas came as priority. Meaning here is that the literary words can have many interpretations, comparing it to the Victorian era where author knows everything. Let's take a look at the characteristic. It has blank verse poems, pictorial poems, remixed rhythms, multiplicity of styles, use of metaphors, use of irony, juxtaposition of idea, and it is totally against the Victorian and Romantic poetry.
Hello, my name is Purata Amity Muhammad Hamidi. My ID is D2018-208-5627. So I'm going to proceed with the characteristic for both era, which is the Victorian and also the modern era. So I'll explain about the Victorian era first. The first one is morality. It swept away error and to reveal the underlying truth about human. And the next one is the revolt, intellectual development. So during this era, the first electric train invented in 1879 by a German, and the first photographs were taken in 1830, and in 1859 Darwin showed to its foundation scientific thoughts. And then the new education has brought up the idea of all children should go to school and check to make sure that schools were up to scratch too. And then it follows with the Industrial Revolution. And during the Victorian era, main focus of writing was the idea of relating people to the nature, but also double standard is happening in gender, and it gave more importance to intellect and realism. So moving on to the modern era, which focusing on the characteristic of the poem. The first one is blank verse poem, pictorial poems, remixed rhythm, multiplicity of styles, use of metaphor, use of irony, juxtaposition of the idea, and totally against Victorian and Romantic poetry. So that's all for me. Thank you.
The differences between Victorian and modern era. The major shift between the Victorian and modern era went from all-knowing to subjective narrative form. Modern era rejected the idea of one knowing everything because modern era viewed things from a more realistic perspective. A great sense of nationalism is portrayed in the Victorian era and started to fade away during the modern era. During the Victorian era, the main focus of writing was only relating to people and nature, while modernists prefer to express literature through science and logic. So this is basically contra to Victorian era. Modern poetry appears quite skeptical of the old certainties and values governing Victorian poetry. Modern poetry is dominated by the strong trend to question, examine, and test whatever is accepted and followed consciously. There is a clear revolt in the modern poetry against its sense of stability. Because of this, modern poetry is a revolt against the Romantic tradition. So these are the literary texts that we have chose from the Victorian and modern era. For the Victorian era, we chose If by Rudyard Kipling. And for the modern era, we chose Hope is a Thing with Feathers by Emily Dickinson. That's all from us. Thank you so much and Assalamualaikum.